Hey everyone, it's Michael GoosebumpsFan. Today I have another Things Like Goosebumps video for you. This is a thing like Goosebumps that I enjoyed a lot. I don't know how much it's influenced R.L. Stine. I know the Universal Monsters films, just by the way he writes, the way he tells certain monster stories sometimes, he's clearly inspired by the Universal Monsters. And I gotta tell you, this film I have been eyeballing for a while. It's a film that I happened to get on my honeymoon, the last day when we were coming back from Tennessee to Virginia. We stopped by a place called McKay's, and McKay's had all kinds of stuff. You talk about being a movie fan or a book fan, they have everything, and it's cheap too. It's real cheap, depending on what we're talking about. Video game stuff, so much stuff. If you've ever been to Tennessee, go to McKay's. It's some great, great stuff I think you'll love out there, for really good prices too. I got this movie for $2.50 at McKay's, and I've wanted to see it for years. Absolutely, for years. I think it was on the VH1 Top 100 Scariest Movie Moments show, TV episode thing, whatever they did, that special they did many years ago, like 10 or so years ago. And I've wanted to see this ever since I saw those clips of the door scene from this movie on there. It's called The Haunting. Of course, many of you probably know of the recent Netflix TV show called The Haunting of Hill House, which is an adaptation of Shirley Jackson's book by the same title. There are two adaptations that are movies, which is the first one, this one right here, from 1963. And then there was a terrible one called The Haunting as well, from like 2000 or 1991, or I don't know. It was horrible. It had Liam Neeson in it. And it was awful. It was awful. Even Qui-Gon Jinn himself couldn't save it. And I remember seeing that on TV when I was younger and absolutely being shocked about how horrible it was. I mean, The Haunting from the 90s is just unbelievably terrible. Even with the Owen Wilson, I think it was Owen Wilson in it as well. It's unbelievable. You wouldn't believe and be shocked by how terrible it is. It's just the greatest example of really bad 90s horror movie, you know? So if you want to see what 90s were like movie-wise a lot of the time, and you're not familiar with that kind of thing, you have no idea. You should watch that piece of crap if you want something to laugh at. Anyway, this movie, the 1963 film, is directed by Robert Wise. Yes, the director of The Sound of Music and West Side Story. All kinds of stuff. Star Trek The Motion Picture, which I also enjoy. I love Sound of Music. I'm not really a big West Side Story person. I think it kind of sucks. I love Sound of Music, though. But in Star Trek Motion Picture, I like that a lot, too. There was something else he directed. I don't remember what it was. But anyway, Robert Wise directed this. This movie's a little lengthy, probably an hour and 50 minutes, almost 2 hours. Kind of surprised for a 50s horror film being that long. Overall, many years ago, let me start here, I read the Shirley Jackson novella. It's about 200 pages, not very long. I read it many years ago, and I was not a fan, by any means. I plan on rereading it at some point. After watching this movie, I kind of want to reread it. It's kind of a quiet horror. If you're a fan of like H.P. Lovecraft, but more of the style, I know his is cosmic horror more than anything, like ancient evils, hidden cities, that kind of thing. It's what H.P. Lovecraft usually writes about. If you like that kind of thing, but you know the way he writes is more quiet horror, kind of in the sense of there's not a lot of jump scare type stuff, even though you can't really pull that off in a book, but a lot of the time people do pull that off, like R.L. Stine can pull that off. It's not really like that. It's more in the sense of, I think I heard a knocking in the wall in the middle of the night. I'm by myself in my bed. Oh no, now I'm hearing a knocking under my bed. What's under my bed? That kind of thing, you know? Shirley Jackson's book was kind of written like that. And sometimes that style works for me. Stine can pull that off sometimes. Lovecraft can pull that off sometimes. I was younger when I read Jackson's book. I was. So maybe I didn't appreciate it the way I could now as an adult, and my taste in horror has kind of changed. My taste in literature has kind of changed. More of a poetry guy. But the way she wrote her book, it wasn't my favorite. And I've heard a lot of people say the same thing I've said, especially big horror fans I know don't really love the book the way a lot of literature people do. I know Shirley Jackson also wrote the short story called The Lottery that a lot of people love to death and think it's one of the best short stories ever written. I've never personally read it, just haven't gotten around to it. But the novella, novel, whatever, not a big fan of, personally. But that's just me. That's of right now. I haven't read it in like 12 years. So it's been a little while. So I can't really completely 100% say that I don't like the book. But I didn't at the time, when I was younger in high school and whatnot. But yeah, again, you grow older, your tastes change, so on and so on. I feel like I also didn't understand everything that was happening in the book when I read it all those years ago. Maybe it's because of the language, I'm not really sure. You know, I usually read the KJV Bible, And I kind of get stuck sometimes on certain things. I have to reread passages a lot sometimes to do that. I know there's newer translations, but I don't entirely go along with that. So I like older literature. I like poetic language. Shirley Jackson kind of has a little bit of that going for her because it's older literature, if you want to call it that. It's kind of just a ghost story. Which, after rambling for like 5 or 10 minutes, yes, this is kind of a haunted house movie. Essentially a scientist who I feel like I know the actor from somewhere. I didn't really look into it, but I feel like I know him from something that I've seen him in. He's a scientist who kind of is more of a paranormal researcher type, and he brings in 3 people who may or may not have psychic powers. And I say that not in the way that Lou makes fun of me in the comments all the time. I say it in the sense of the main character is a woman who is really sick of her family. She's getting sick of dealing with her... There's like a guy riding a 4-wheeler by the window. I'm sorry if you've been hearing that noise all the time, but that's what's happening out here, I believe. Really, bro? Really? Yeah, go away. Okay, he's gone, I think. You might still hear him in the background, but he won't be as loud as me as he just was. Anyway, he's coming back. I guess he's mowing the lawn or something. I don't know. I thought it was a 4-wheeler out there. I can't see him when I was looking down there. I just hear him moving along. I'm going to try to talk over him as loud as I can, so forgive me for that, guys. I didn't know that was going to happen. I think in previous recordings I heard him off in the distance. Anyway, so essentially, our main character may or may not have some kind of psychic ability. She's had encounters, apparently, with poltergeist or a poltergeist at some point, which is a type of demonic spirit type of thing. They call it a playful ghost, but again, I don't really believe in that. I believe it's more probably a demon. And they bring her into this investigation type of research thing in this place called Hill House that may or may not be haunted, apparently. And I think there's a lot more symptoms of it possibly being haunted by some kind of demonic entity. Because of every single person that's pretty much lived in this house or been in this house at some point has died in a horrible, tragic accident somehow, some way. Sometimes by suicide, even. It's been horrific, honestly, the history of that house. It's been around for like 100 years, I think is what the film says, or 90 years, something in that ballpark. And it's a creepy-looking house, man. There's not many of these haunted house movies that you see nowadays, or even at this time in the 60s, that don't just either look too spooky or look like a Paranormal Activity house from one of those movies. It just looks like a basic California home, you know? This house looks creepy. I don't know if it's a real place or if it's just like a small structure they built for the film, but it looks great. It genuinely is creepy. They mention in the film that the house feels like it's looking at the main characters when they're standing outside of the building. You kind of feel that way when you're looking at it. This film overall, Robert Wise built this atmosphere around this movie. It's impeccable. It really is. Whether you like the book or not, I think there's a lot to enjoy with this movie. I think that, even though I haven't seen the Netflix TV show, everybody keeps telling me to watch that season of Haunting of Hill House, even though I've not seen that, I can tell you straightforward, this is a really, really, really good like adaptation of that book from what I remember. It's also really good in general as just a horror movie. It's drenched in atmosphere. It's just an eerie, creepy movie with just a lot going on, a lot of character stuff happening. The ghostly moments in this movie are what I was concerned with going into it. Because in the book, for example, there's a scene of the main character, she and a friend named Theo, I think is her nickname. She's one of the other psychics that are living in the house. And those other 2 psychics may actually have real experience with ghosts and reading minds and so on and so on. So they're there also as people to partake in this experiment. And the main character and her friend are in this room because they were afraid of sleeping alone in different rooms because of just the creepiness of the house, the way the rooms feel, how cold it's been and whatnot, the knockings up and down the hallways, all these banging noises going up and down the hallways that no one can explain, really. They're not even entirely sure that everybody in the house heard all the banging noises. Some of them seem like they didn't. It didn't even faze them. And when they're in the dark at one point, they're talking about the main character holding her hand, the friend's hand, in the dark when they start hearing some noises outside of the door, like something like banging on the door or whatever it was. And that scene is in the book, of course. If you've read the book, you know. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen the movie or read the book, don't worry. But the holding hands scene, I was really worried about whether it could be done well in this movie. It actually was. I actually think it was very creepy how it was done. There's a lot of stuff here that I did not expect to work after reading the book so long ago. From just memory, I was like, I don't know how they could pull that off. But I want to give it the benefit of the doubt because it's a black and white horror film. A lot of the time, if they have any kind of reputation at all to them, they're usually really great and better than almost anything else that's been released in the last 20 years. Gotta tell you, I didn't love this movie. It was good. It was really, really good, actually, but I don't love it. It was really good. I think the ending's even done better than the way the actual book was from Shirley Jackson. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, maybe I haven't read the book in so long, I don't know. But I really, really, really like this movie. I think if you're a Goosebumps fan, I think if you're a fan of horror movies, if you like ghost movies or possession movies, haunted movies, whatever, I think you'd really like The Haunting. It's a really creepy flick. If you don't mind black and white films and that kind of slower pacing, but in the best possible way of slower pacing, this film builds up its characters, it builds up everything about it that really works. Even the main character, like I said, her animosity towards her, I think it's her brother. No, it's her sister and her brother-in-law. After the loss of her mom and how they've acted, they all live in the same apartment. They're really snarky and rude to her all the time. They don't even want her to take out her car to go, that she paid half and half with them to buy this car, to go on this small vacation to the Hill House experiment. It's kind of a shame how she's treated. She's a very sweet character. I actually think I like her a lot more here than I do in the book, because in the book I feel like it was a great example of why I didn't know what was going on, because you'd be so focused on this character and like there really wasn't a whole lot of personality to most of the characters in that book, aside from being either super snarky or having no personality at all, or being the smart guy, pretty much. I really like The Haunting a lot. I think it's a good flick. I think if you haven't seen this movie, you're really missing out. Really, really awesome little flick. Really surprisingly creepy little movie for a 60s film. I'm not a big 60s movie fan. I'm just not. You know, I love like the 50s and the 40s and the 30s and so on and so on. But, I mean, this is really good to be a 60s horror flick about a haunted house. I mean, that house is creepy. The design of the inside of the building, like the interiors and whatnot, the hallways, all that stuff, the rooms they sleep in, there's just something so eerie about it. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point somebody went into this film and talked about, like, you know how in the new Netflix show, everybody's always talking about the hidden ghosts in the background of stuff. Like you might see a curtain with feet hanging out of it or whatever. You know how people talk about that all the time? I feel like that's something that you could also go back into this film and see that somewhere in there. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's nothing in there that people say it is, but maybe it is. I don't know. I haven't heard anybody say anything about that. But that would be so cool, dude, if Robert Wise was smart enough to do that back then. But this film overall, whether it has that or not, I mean, that is some creepy flick right there if you haven't seen this movie. So The Haunting, if I had to rate The Haunting from 1963 on a 5-star basis, I would easily give this a high 4 out of 5 stars. I really dig it. I think it's a really solid flick. I don't know how the ending would let me try that again. I don't know how the ending would resound with many viewers who see this film for the first time. It might not be the best possible ending. You might not love it. I feel like it's a little bit different from the book ending. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think it's mostly identical except for a couple of things, but man, it was good. It was a really solid flick. I really was surprised by how much I liked this. I'm glad I got to get this on my honeymoon, you know, and have a good memory of this DVD and having it with me all the time. Hopefully for the rest of my life, God willing. But anyway, what are your thoughts on The Haunting? Have you seen this flick? What do you think about it? If you're a Goosebumps fan, like I said, I think you'll like this movie. There's some really eerie stuff in here that might get under your skin. It might really get to you. It's not gory. No language as far as I remember. Maybe a couple of words here and there. It's a 60s flick. They just kind of started doing that at that point. But I think it's great. Really solid flick, really. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Put them down below. Have you read the book from Shirley Jackson? Have you seen the Netflix show? Have you seen that horrible Liam Neeson film? Oh, Qui-Gon. Oh, Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon Jinn's my favorite Star Wars character. So it's kind of, well, one of them, at least. He's the most cool Jedi, I think. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Put them down below. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Goodbye.